Hi, Terry and
Libby.
Libby. Eve McDonald-Madden is an old friend and colleague, and she said maybe you two might have something interesting to say about decision analysis from a consultant's perspective, from a practitioner's perspective. We both work at Melbourne Uni, but quite a lot of our time is dedicated to helping out clients rather than contributing papers or doing much teaching. So we thought all we did in terms of preparation was say, okay, well, here are some headings, how we came to be interested, how we came to be relevant, blah, blah, blah. You can see them there. And we thought we'd just prepare one slide each. So we'll just stumble through this talk, just speaking to each of our slides under those headings. Beep. What's next? How we came to be interested. Well, how I came to be interested. This is my slide. I think like most of us, we fall into a career partly by accident, and partly just by some sort of vague ambition. For me, it was accident and incompetence. I work at the University of Melbourne, but I am not a great academic, which is to say, of course, the metric of academia is publishing papers, and I just don't like it. It's just no fun for me. So that's the incompetent side of things. The accident, I guess, was it's largely about your career direction, or in part about who you meet. And I met early on Mark Bergman. And I just thought he was a really interesting and a lovely guy, and I thought I'd like to learn more of him. So he's been a great mentor. He taught me a lot about risk assessment, and I made some contributions as a risk analyst. But I sort of thought, well, how far can we take this? This is risky. This is not so risky. Yeah. It's only part of the decision-making process. So I really sort of thought, well, I need to take this further, and that's how I got into decision analysis.
Yeah, and I think mine, my pathway was quite similar. So I started off making decision support tools, playing around and making Bayesian networks. And
that's your big horendogram model.
That's one of them. Yeah. Oh, the start of one. I probably didn't even do it. Anyway, Terry asked me to help out or come along and help out on a couple of workshops on Kangaroo Island, and that opened my eyes a little to the fact that there was a much broader, that there were steps before you got to even thinking about a decision support tool that were crucial. And so that opened my eyes. And then I went to the States and I hung out with Mike Rumpff for a bit, and we did a workshop, and so I had this exposure to to these people that could really effectively facilitate a process of bringing a whole bunch of people through working through a decision. And I think I just got a little bit hooked. And the other picture that I've got on this slide is one of my the latest workshops that I was involved in, and it was back on Kangaroo Island. So, 10 years later, full circle with, there were 80 participants in the room, and we were working through, what do we need in a recovery plan for Kangaroo Island post 1920 fires. So
yeah, great. Right, so the next theme is how we came to be relevant. In part, this was how we came to be interested as well. It was fairly apparent to us that there was this sort of yawning chasm between the way decisions could or should be made according to the sorts of things that we were exposed to at university, and then the things that we would see in practice. Sometimes in private organisations, but overwhelmingly our work is in the public sector. So we thought, well, we could make a contribution here. Surely we can be relevant. And this is my slide, and it's just a couple of things that that many people see in different organisations. It's still part of management fashion is to trot out smart goals or smart objectives. So specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, timely goals. organisations might sit through several meetings to arrive at these goals. But I think in general, the stuff I see as outputs of those processes they're daft. They're dreamy aspirations that forsake trade-offs. Because in order to just have smart goals, you've actually got to go through some sort of decision analysis, and they don't do that. They just shoot the breeze in these meetings. So I thought, we can contribute there. And then of course the other thing is risk analysis as one form of helping decision making. That can be very rudimentary. Those risk matrices are used a lot. That one in particular is enormously daft. I mean, normally, when we think about risk, it's expected utility or expected disutility. We think about that in terms of generally decision analysis. It's the product of the probability or the likelihood and the consequences. This one is adding them up.
So you blow them apart. That's your job, isn't it? To blow the risk matrix.
Well, part of our self-promotion is pointing out how daft a lot of the tools are.
Yeah, and I think going through a process of understanding values and setting, and understanding fundamental objectives as opposed to means objectives is generally a pretty time-consuming but really valuable contribution. Sometimes that's all I'm brought in to help nut through is how do you understand what's important here, and then how do you measure it. So it's good.
Yeah, plenty of organisations that have smart goals for means objectives, and they don't actually know what they're about.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes quite clear. And then what was I going to say? I was going to say that often, how did I come to be relevant? I think that organisations see, and increasingly see, that having someone who has enough of a technical understanding and an understanding of the context or the issue at hand, but who is independent from the problem, is an extremely valuable thing, particularly when it comes to contentious issues. So I guess one of the first projects that I worked on was one which was contentious. It was multi-objective, and the people involved had been asked to do a study, and then they had to make some recommendations to take to the minister, and they weren't sure how to do that, because how do you make recommendations and to be seen to be completely not taking a side with a particular issue. So I was involved in that, and
I mean, it's gratifying to be relevant, but it's sort of it's sort of an indictment of the lack of trust in our well, for us in a lot of these public sector organisations, that they do have to get in us, because for them to facilitate making process would be seen as biased.
Yes. Yeah. And then the other thing that I was going to say with that is, I guess, doing enough of these different problems from different disciplines, but having that understanding that you have to be able to map out the problem beforehand and just be a few steps ahead of where the room is a very valuable thing to bring to a room. Yeah.
So there would be many decision problems though that you work in where you have a sense that, well, this is really important. Often for us it's we care about ecological things and conservation. Yeah. But you sort of have to bite your lip, don't you? I mean, because you're there as an agent of trust. Yes. And so do you bite your lip all the time or some of the time?
No, I'd say that I do. That's tricky, Terry. You can't ask me to do that. Room full of people, but I think if I think something is going to be problematic, or I can see that there's going to be an issue, and particularly if there's people missing from the room, then I will point it out, and I might play. I guess you could see that as playing devil's advocate as well. So you're often
walking a tightrope, aren't you, between the interests of different stakeholders and their perceptions of you.
Yeah.
You need to be neutral.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
That's difficult.
You have to be careful, and it is tricky.
Right, next theme. What? You would think that people that work in consultancy would know what their clients want, and that we would have some sage insights here. But not much. I mean, I talked about an aching chasm between how decision makers or decisions could or should be made, and how they're actually made in most organisations most of the time. You would think, well, we should be fabulously busy. We are busy, Libby and I. We have comfortable middle class lives. We're doing all right out of this caper. But it's not as though people are knocking on our doors all the time. So this slide is it's a review in the Guardian about a book that described the friendship and the collaboration between Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, cognitive psychologists that did a lot of their work in the 60s and 70s. In Israel, and came up with the heuristics and biases program, which sort of points out in large part how stupid people are in making decisions. And they made enormous contributions to the psychology of reasoning and the frailties in that. But there was a juncture in their careers when they said, let's get into this decision analysis stuff. This looks like this is where we're really going to make a difference. And they had already made a very substantial difference, especially Daniel Kahneman working with the Israeli military, improving their systems for recruitment and the way they go about different military applications. They got interested in decision analysis. They thought, great, we've been invited to the big table, so mega decisions about foreign policy and military strategy for the Israeli government. And the people around the table, largely ignored them. And so they became enormously disenchanted, and they said, well, to hell with this. We were wrong. Decision analysis is not for us. And it's true. I guess the point I want to make is that decision makers don't want someone that comes into the room and tells them expressly how to make a decision or what that decision should be. So part of this is about a humility which doesn't come easily.
No.
because how this program of heuristics and biases pointed out how stupid people are, but you've got to, there's got to be a modicum of, or some artistic way of pointing out that maybe there are some frailties in the way you go about it.
Yeah.
But likewise, I'm here with humility and going to help where I can.
Yeah.
Because it's exceedingly rare, in truth, for decision makers to invite you into their tent and say, "I'm struggling. Can you help?"
Can you help? And I don't know what to add to that. I think that's a really good point. But I think recognising that being helpful is that's the job at hand, and so you do. You do have to be able to let go of something because it might not go in a direction that you thought. Yeah. Yep. Good. All right. So mine, I guess, some of the, even if you have been invited into the room, sometimes things can become apparent or go a little bit awry. So.
There can be elephants, cars and bunny rabbits.
Yeah, and stormtroopers. So I didn't quite choose the right picture for that one, but the first point is that sometimes you might the decision maker will bring a whole bunch of stakeholders and different values, and that there's going to be trade-offs on the table, and they'll bring them into the room and say, okay, well, here, we're going to go through this big participatory process, and we're going to nut through this decision, and we're going to hear from you, and it gets to the point where you get to hear what the trade-offs of the individuals in the room or the groups that they're representing, and that can be a bit confronting for a decision maker, and if it becomes apparent that the decision that's being put up as the preferred alternative is not the one that the decision maker thinks is the way things should be, and pulls the pin, it can be an immensely frustrating process for a whole bunch of people. So that's one of the things I think that can can go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's that? That's the stormtroopers and the bunny ears.
Yeah,
Is that
and
right?
I didn't mean the participants to be the evil stormtroopers and the decision maker to be the silly bunny, but yeah, I was just trying to say that sometimes there's one pretty influential person that can push a process and
Right. So
and
what
make it
decision
a
makers
problem.
want? There are circumstances where decision makers want a process which legitimises their naked intuition.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
And how do you guard against that?
So I think it's about setting expectations early about what the process is. But again, even when you go through the process, I think people don't necessarily understand that there is a point at which you will analyse trade-offs, and that might happen. But I do try and set the expectations at the start and put a couple of different ways to them that you could run through the trade-off, because I think that's where it becomes really problematic, is when you start looking at trade-offs. If you get that far, and so you could say, well, you could do this, and you could ask everyone in the room to tell you what they think is a good, or what their preferred alternative is. But if you don't want to entertain that, but you want to have all of those people in the room to understand the process, or for whatever reason, then we get the decision maker to go through that trade-off, by themselves. So I think making sure you've covered off on a few different ways to address that step can be important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
All right, so moving on to my toy car. I think one of the things that can happen is that the people running the show will want to get it perfect the first time. They'll be under time constraints, and I think one of the criticisms we get is that this process takes a long time, and we can't get everyone together for more than a day, multiple workshops, more than a day. And so it's really, again, about trying to impress that it has to be an iterative process, or maybe if you've mapped it out enough times, you will get it right. But often this is a process by which you'll get to the end and you'll say, well, there's some missing objectives, or gosh, we really need to tweak our alternatives now, and having that time to be able to do that is often necessary, but it can be seen as a bit of a luxury, I guess.
Yeah. So you sort of need to have enough dexterity and competence to be able to do this stuff at two levels. You need to be able to deploy it rapidly, do rapid prototyping.
Yeah.
But if there's appetite for a deep dive, you need to be able to
do that.
Bring that to the table too.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that can be important, and particularly if it's contentious and and people want a big participatory process, is to sit down with the smaller group and try and go through it so that you can see what's going on. I think Mike Lunch taught me the value of that one. So yeah.
I mean, it can help a lot in insulating against your first circumstance of the bunnykins and the stormtroopers.
Exactly.
The decision maker who actually carries the can when it comes to the outcomes can see where this is going.
Yeah, where it's going. Yeah.
What's your elephant?
My last one is the classic. Well, it may be an elephant in the room or it may not be, which is that sometimes, and it doesn't always happen. It's not immediately obvious that there might be hidden objectives that, for some reason, one reason or another, can't be put on the table. And sometimes they are elephants that people know about them, but it's really hard to deal with them transparently. And sometimes they're not. They just you get right to the end and it's back to the stormtrooper and the bunny. It's like, that preferred alternative doesn't work for me because of this reason. So I'll sink the process. So
when we think about what decision makers want, I mean there are circumstances in which, rare circumstances I think, where they want the elephant to be revealed and talked about candidly. Yeah. But more frequently they want to hide the elephant and somehow still navigate some sort of acceptable. They're very difficult circumstances to work in.
Yeah, they are. And I think if people know that there's an elephant in the room, then we won't even get invited in. I think that's the case where you go, well, I don't really want this process. But sometimes it can crop up halfway through.
Yeah. I find them those circumstances, they're common enough and they're very frustrating. You know, we've done a fair bit of work in the past in biosecurity where notionally it's about protection of plant health or animal health, or the environment. But it's largely, the elephant is, well, this is a game where we're actually protecting the growers within our economy. Exactly. That's right. But you can't say that, that's against the rules. And you find it's difficult to make a contribution in that setting if you're not allowed to put that out as an objective.
That's a great example. Reputational risk, that's the other one.
That's
that
right.
That comes up a lot as well, and half the time people are really happy to have that on the table as an objective, and other times not.
Most of the big objective for the decision maker is save my ass. Right, so we thought we'd talk about a grab bag of useful things as consultants. And I just wanted to emphasise two things. I've got two slides here. One of them is this little problem, which is about really probabilistic reasoning, and the second one is about trade-offs. So I think it's an underwhelming sell to walk into a client and say, look, I'm a decision analyst, and for them to sit back in their chair and go, and what does that mean? And you say, well, it's about objectives and alternatives and helping you navigate those difficulties of objectives and alternatives. And they sort of nod and say, well, great, thanks very much. I think the meat and potatoes of what we can help with is in the characterisation of the consequences, and usually that involves probabilistic reasoning and difficulties in probabilistic reasoning. So that's what this slide is about. And then the other thing is in navigating trade-offs. So this classic problem here, I mean, we could take the time to read it, but people can read it at their own leisure. It's a problem for Kahneman and Tversky. They called this the base rate fallacy. People are no good at reasoning probabilistically, and in particular, they're no good at recognising the circumstances where they should be using Bayes' theorem. So it's a tricky problem. It's a difficult problem. The problem is remarkably common. So I've trotted this or a mirror of this very problem out in settings in biosecurity, where you're looking at not a juror, a witness that has imperfect visibility, but for a quarantine system which is imperfect in its capacity to pick up pests and diseases, or imperfect detectability for surveys before a development takes place in an environmental impact assessment, or in public health settings where you've got an imperfect diagnostic test for a cancer or whatever it might be. There are many, many settings in which this problem is mirrored, and you can say to the client, well, it's not a straightforward thing. Most people, when they're faced with that question, most jurors, or if it was the medical setting, most doctors with an imperfect diagnostic test, they would say, 80%, a little bit less than 80%. If you apply Bayes' theorem here, we won't go through it, but the answer is 41.4% is the chances that the errant cab was green, as the witness claimed. So it's a good marketing tool.
It is.
Yeah. The other one is so trade-offs as well. Subjective. A lot of organisations avoid any sort of element of subjectivity or being candid about it, but they know that it's very much a part of the landscape when they're talking about stakeholder dynamics and so on and so forth. This particular slide is that's a picture of Sarah Lichtenstein, who was one of the earliest decision analysts that worked with Paul Slovic and Robin Gregory and others in the United States. Her particular interest, or one of her particular interests, were trade-offs between what stakeholders or decision makers might regard as sacred. So that's often, for our stakeholders that we work with, it might be threatened species, or it might be human life. Trade-offs between those sacred values and secular values, and usually that's
cash,
money, or boring things. So it might be the taxpayers' cash, or the organisation's cash. And so when you're looking at, what would you be willing to pay to save this threatened species, or this human life, or this many human lives? Oh, it's easy because people don't really engage in the trade-off. They say lots. I'd be prepared to pay lots and lots and lots, almost an infinite amount. So that was Sarah's point in that paper, that what's bad, as in it's a difficult trade-off to confront. It's a taboo trade-off, but it's socially easy. You just say, I'll pay anything for it, and of course you get lousy outcomes with that attitude. So showing potential clients, that you're at least aware that there are these difficulties in navigating trade-offs, I think helps a lot. It helps them trust you and regard you as competent.
Or a psycho.
Well, that's right. Yeah. So when you actually go through this and you see in stakeholder settings and you say, now we've got to take our time here. Yeah. This is a taboo trade-off, and I know you all want to treat this flippantly, but if you're seen to be taking these two taboo trade-offs seriously.
But sometimes people refuse as well. We've had a workshop where people refuse to even entertain going through this, which is what do you do there? And it's
I know what I do in that circumstance. I mean, I say, well, you want it to be a part of this decision. This is a serious trade-off in this decision. Seems like you're not quite grown up enough to actually want to be at the table.
Good.
Maybe not in that many words, but I say you basically abrogated your place at the table.
Yeah, that's true. But I think having a few different ways that you can navigate that conversation and how stepping through a bit of a process of a discussion about what those trade-offs are, right through to doing it analytically. Because you can stuff it up, and you do have to be so careful, particularly. Yeah,
I mean, I'm only talking about a grab bag of useful things in terms of securing the trust and goodwill of a client. I mean, when you actually trot it out, it's difficult.
Yeah, it's good. So mine was a bit different, and that's right back at the start. And I think it's
the start of the decision making.
Sorry,
process.
The start of. The start of everything, thinking through what is the decision to be made. So, working through what are the problems, or what's the big problem, and how do you translate that into a decision or decisions. So sometimes it's about it's such a multifaceted set of problems that you do have to lay it out, because it's not always. I think people aren't always clear about exactly what they want and in what order they need to address different problems. So, trying to understand, well, who are your decision makers, and what's important to them? What's the spatial and the temporal scale of which you're working at, of which you care about things, but then your management or over which the decisions is to be made. What are the constraints? Are there are there recurring? Is it a recurring decision? Are there linked decisions? Like, there's so many things that I think come into nutting out the problem context and writing a really clear and good decision statement that people can understand and see, and so they all know why they're in the room. I think that's pretty invaluable.
Yeah, it's a real art, isn't it? I mean, once you get some experience, the contribution you make of just formulating the decision problem is enormous.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. Anyway.
Yeah. Thanks. Good.
Right, we've got a couple of themes left. Favourite applications and then gratuitous advice. Our favourite application, it was the same. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
We've worked in many different settings, but our favourites was fairly recent work dealing with bushfire management. So that's a painting from Red Tuesday, I think it is, 1926. But the fires that mattered in our professional working lives were the fires in 2009, big Royal Commission here in Victoria, and a blanket prescription that came out of that Royal Commission, which was, well, the risks of bushfire are too great, and we're going to have a blanket requirement that the government burns 5% of the public forested estate each year, which was about a quadrupling of what they were doing before the 2009 fires. So a lot of prescribed burning to try to reduce fuel loads, and it was going to cost a lot of money.
With perverse outcomes for the environment.
Yeah, with generally bad outcomes for flora and fauna,
Yeah.
and speculative outcomes for life and property. So it's a difficult policy setting. We made different contributions in different parts of this policy process, but I worked with a bunch of really good people. That's part of why I really enjoyed it, why it was a favourite occasion, down in the Otway Ranges, and they were a little bit naughty. They didn't really have the support or blessing of head office to go and do this sort of formal decision analysis.
Also, like, was your favourite.
Yeah, I liked it that they were a bit naughty, and it took a long time, but we came out with stuff that was, pretty useful and pretty influential. But we went through, we navigated, difficulties in probabilistic reasoning, difficulties in trade-offs, difficulties in problem formulation, with a bunch of stakeholders, with a bunch of co-managers, and it made people sit up and think, oh, this blanket prescription is wrong. We need to rethink this. So yeah, it ended up making enduring contributions to policy as well. I hope they're enduring.
Yeah, well, I think they are, because I guess my part in that particular problem came a few years down the track, and I think that project did get a lot of traction with policymakers because then there was a project to understand, well, how could all of the regions around Victoria use structured decision making to go through the process of making decisions about how they were going to apply prescribed burning in the landscape that balanced ecological objectives with life and property and other objectives. And so with colleagues from Arthur Riley Institute, we went about setting out a decision framework that really helped bring ecological objectives into those decisions, and it was, I like it because we had lots of different regions and because the regions were really diverse. The framework needed to be flexible as well. So I think coming up with a framework where people could, it represented the different values and objectives that these different regions had, and it reflected a choice of performance measures that people could understand and apply and think about next to life and property, so that you could understand how to go through those trade-offs.
Yeah. So 20 minutes ago or so, we talked about the need to be impartial as an analyst, but our background is we care about conservation and we care about ecological outcomes. But clearly after the bushfires and the Royal Commission, people were really myopically focused on life and property, and you knew that biodiversity issues were a part of the mix as well. So it's almost a professional responsibility for us to make those things that are repressed visible again. And that's what you did.
Yeah, thanks.
And it wasn't biased. It was it was professional.
Professional, that's us.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, okay. Last slide, gratuitous advice. Yeah. I mean, it is gratuitous because
Guess who wrote this?
Yeah, I wrote this. Yeah. But we are. I mean, we're bumbling through. We're comfortably middle class and all the rest of it. So we've got enough work. Everyone needs to find their own way. But for me, working along with my colleagues in the university to make a contribution in academia, you usually have to be able to say that the solution is elegant and that the solution is the best solution available. You need to optimise things and show that you've done the optimal thing. So most of my colleagues are immersed in that world. But I mean, my belief is that organisational decision making is so parlous, so lousy, that all you can reasonably hope for is not optimisation, but good decisions. And as I say there, often all we do is insulate against really bad decisions, and I think that's really good. That's enough. That's a really good contribution.
Well, I think real life is complicated and it's messy, and so it's just helping navigate the mess sometimes. So I think that's good.
Yeah, I mean, and earlier, again, 20 minutes ago, we talked about the need for humility when you're dealing with actual decision makers. I mean, the sentiment there is fairly self-assured. But I think you need that as well. You need to be humble, but you need to be confident enough to know that, well, left to their own devices, they're going to have smart goals and a stupid risk matrix. They're going to do pretty badly. So lots of things that I've done, I look back on and I think, oh, that was a bit busted, but not terribly busted. So I guess you've got to be happy with.
Hopefully not fatally busted.
Yeah,
it's good.
You got to be happy with a contribution that is not optimization, not optimal outcomes, but reasonably good outcomes.
Yeah. Good process, not outcome. Yeah.
Good. That's right. Good. We're done.